All right, good morning, everyone. We are just getting started. We're allowing people to still sign on, and we'll be starting shortly in the next minute, so hold tight, please.
I'll just write it down. But thank you. I'm gonna look at it.
All right, so again, if you're just joining us, we're taking a couple more minutes to let folks sign in, and then we'll have our official welcome begin in just a bit. Yes. Is that feedback mine? Okay. Right. So Mary will go over all of that one.
I'll just mute everybody.
Okay.
Yep.
Isn't that a number sign?
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. You are in the
I wonder if I can be heard.
There are over 20 participants in the meeting.
Okay, District 4, can you hear us now?
Okay, they can hear us now. Right. So in case you missed it, thank you for calling in. We have some really great information for you today from Public Health. And thank you to Sac State for putting everything together and let us use their facilities. There are some people on the participants list that all I can see is phone numbers. So if you could just send me a quick chat and let me know your name so we know everyone that we need to send an evaluation to at the end of this, that would be really helpful. We have Mary Strode and Victoria Custodio here from Public Health, and Tracy and Babette here from Sac State, which they're our partners here at the Active Transportation Resource Center, which is funded by the ATP, and Caltrans administers it. Sac State pretty much handles the assistance on the infrastructure side, and Public Health handles the assistance on the non-infrastructure side. So at this point, I think I will like to give it over to Public Health so that they can get started on everything that they've provided today. Oh, and I'm sorry, one more thing. If you have a question, please go down over to the right side. If you don't have it set up, you can go to the bottom of your screen and hit the chat button, and you can type your question, if you haven't already done that, over here to the right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Mary. And again, I want to welcome and thank everyone on the phone for attending our webinar today. As mentioned during the introduction, my name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm one of 3 Active Transportation Resource Center regional coordinators at the California Department of Public Health. As Mary mentioned, we provide technical assistance, training, and resource referrals in support of ATP non-infrastructure awardees, as well as interested stakeholders who are looking to tap into the ATP funds in the future. My colleague Mary Strode and I will be tag teaming today as presenters. We have what we think is an informative session planned for you, and we're hoping you'll be active participants in this training by asking questions and sharing your related knowledge of non-infrastructure strategies. And we did intend for this to be both an in-person and webinar event, and we're hoping that it'll still maintain an interactive component, despite the fact that we actually have all participants attending via webinar. So information about how to use Zoom went out with a calendar invite to this training. Before we begin, please be reminded that you may ask questions both through the webinar chat features that Mary pointed out, but also by phones at special points along the presentation, and I'm going to talk about that in just more depth in a little bit. Okay. Before we begin, Mary, are there any tech questions or issues that we want to work through before we begin?
I don't see any comments on that.
Okay, excellent. All right, so then my next slide is an agenda of what we're going to cover today in the training this morning. So we are going to begin with a background on why this training is occurring. Why are we doing a training on non-infrastructure for Caltrans local assistance? Next off, we're going to define non-infrastructure and also review a few key resources that really provide a foundation for our non-infrastructure understanding for the active transportation program specifically. And then lastly, our background is going to discuss the importance of non-infrastructure strategies as complementary strategies to the bigger infrastructure improvements that are occurring throughout the state as a result of ATP funding. Next, we'll get into the main portion of the webinar, which is focused on actual non-infrastructure strategies and examples, and the many examples that exist. So what we're going to do is talk about these strategies based on what we're calling the 3 E's of non-infrastructure, and that has been set for us by the California Transportation Commission. So first off, we'll talk about education, then we'll move on to encouragement, and then we'll talk about enforcement. So that's the 3 E's of the CTC's NI model, but we do know that there are additional non-infrastructure strategies that can be funded out of ATP. So we're going to also spend a little bit of time talking about evaluation and also plans. Okay. So as a follow-up to what I just mentioned earlier, since we'd like this training to be as interactive as possible, we're planning to have time for questions following each segment of the training. So after background, I'll ask for questions, and then again after each of the E's, education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and then plans. But please know that we also plan on having a more robust question and answer period following all the presentations. And then finally, we're going to wrap up and do next steps. And our intention is to do presentations until about what does the agenda say? 11:40.
For the Q&A?
Presentations will end, and then Q&A starts at
11:45.
11:45. So yeah, so we have roughly an hour to go over the real meat of our presentation and have discussions. All right. Next slide is here. All right, so I'm going to move to our background and why we're here today. So we wanted to make sure that all the districts, all 12 of you, were aware of how this training came about. As mentioned earlier, our work includes technical assistance and training for non-infrastructure awardees and interested parties. But since we started this work back in 2015, we've been playing with the idea of how beneficial it would be to do a training with Caltrans local assistance staff on non-infrastructure strategies, since it's so really so different from what's traditionally covered and is supported by local assistance. More recently, we've been fielding both individual questions from local assistance as well as formal asks for staff training on non-infrastructure. So I want to give a shout out to District 4 who really gave us the impetus for putting this training together. Thank you, Z and team at District 4. I wish I could be in the cool Bay Area weather, since it's going to be upwards of about 110 degrees today here in Sacramento. Can understand why people might not want to make the trip up to this way for the in-person training. So anyway, to go back to the background, our ATRC team also conducted a needs assessment as part of our first scope of work. And we did that specifically with non-infrastructure ATP awardees. Caltrans has that information, and we recognize that there were lots of responses that suggested that broader awareness of non-infrastructure strategies would help local assistance staff actually support their work in their respective districts. So we're really pleased to be offering this training today and to have the approval to do so. We realize that this demonstrates Caltrans' commitment to supporting non-infrastructure strategies, and that it also increases your district's understanding of these strategies, and then how that then can feed up into the assistance that you're able to provide, as well as the project deliverability for non-infrastructure programs and infrastructure in combination with non-infrastructure. All right. So next slide. Okay, so wanted to also reflect back on some sources for non-infrastructure definitions and shared references. We wanted to make sure that you had the following content as part of this background for this training. These are key resources that you already are familiar with, but we want to remind you that they function as shared references for all of us. So all of us who aren't within the transportation world, the public that we serve, those that are looking to get into these programs and benefit from these investments. And they function as shared references for the legislative and departmental policies that set the tone for what's allowable for both ATP infrastructure and non-infrastructure. So first off, I want to just highlight Senate Bill 99, which I hope all of you are familiar with. That was set in 2013. That established the ATP and defined for the public that ATP is to provide for a broad spectrum of projects. So definitely all of the infrastructure improvements that you guys support, but also in addition to that, some programmatic work that really engages users and gets at that behavior change that we're seeking. Secondly, as all of you know, non-infrastructure guidance, along with infrastructure guidance for the ATP program, is set by the California Transportation Commission, and that is set for each cycle of ATP. And so there's a link here just in case you don't have it already handy, that highlights that guidance. We know that Caltrans is in the midst of finalizing guidance for the 2017 ATP augmentation. There's actually going to be a workshop tomorrow here that CTC is hosting here in Sacramento, where that guidance will be finalized. And then we also know that there's the CTC and Caltrans are gearing up for cycle 4, which we know and think will have a significantly different look, since we have this proliferation of new funding for the ATP program as a result of SB1. So, which we were reminded yesterday is state funding and very flexible funding. So that's very exciting. And I know you all like innovation and flexibility. So then lastly, I wanted to point out, and I do find this ironic because you are local assistants, but I just wanted to say that as a background document, chapter 22 is really something that we continually provide back to local non-infrastructure projects to show, like, here's the guidance for what you're allowed to do within this program. Here's where you go, and it's a manual for you, and also serves for those that are funded. So this is the latest guidance that was updated in April. And of course, we expect that it'll be updated again for upcoming calls for funding and projects. All right. So with this slide, I want to point out some recent policy plans that Caltrans has released that really speaks to the importance of non-infrastructure strategies as complementary and necessary interventions to increase walking and bicycling trips and to enhance the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, and to meet public health goals and engage disadvantaged communities, all of the goals of the ATP program. For us, this speaks to the importance of non-infrastructure and how non-infrastructure is essential in meeting Caltrans 2020 goals, which we summarize as tripling bicycling trips and doubling walking trips. So this is the first statewide plan entitled Towards an Active Transportation. So it's really, this is a great tool. It's substantive and important, excuse me, a huge undertaking that brought together many different stakeholders at the state level and local level, regional level, and allowed for ongoing public input. The result is a very, very comprehensive, holistic plan. So as we know, this plan lays out an ambitious agenda for Caltrans and its partners to support active transportation in the state. And we want to point out that education and training, thank you, are critical elements of the implementation of the plan. And this last piece is a direct quote. Caltrans and other state agencies can lead by example by implementing and supporting programs across the state to encourage people to try walking and bicycling. And so within the plan, there's a lot that supports the presentation that we're about to give. Okay, so that actually, let me see if I can go back, don't jump ahead, ends my background section. Are there any questions that are coming in from the districts? Okay, excellent. All right, so then I'll move forward to the actual meat of our presentation today. Okay, so our next section is an overview of non-infrastructure strategies, the 3 E's that I alluded to earlier. And on this slide, I just wanted to acknowledge, I want to start by saying that we are at the ATRC are very aware that engineering is the capital E of the E's of the Active Transportation Program. Engineering is what modifies the built environment to allow for safe and comfortable facilities and networks for bicyclists and pedestrians. And we understand it's the core of the program. What you're doing to our streetscape is the core of the program. In addition, the way we see it is that non-infrastructure is the perfect complement to what engineers are working on, in that it gets people to use and trust in those engineering improvements, And in the cases where those treatments haven't been placed, it gives them an opportunity to find temporary solutions for being safe and still active. So according to the CTC, non-infrastructure strategies fall into one of three categories: education, encouragement, and enforcement. And the picture we have here is just a visual of a reflection of the composite of all of the three E's. And, you know, I think these presentations are really come alive when you see people actually, you know, moving around and realizing our endpoint is about user comfort and user understanding of what's the expectation around shared roads. All right. Okay, so our first E is, thanks. The first E is education. And education, as you know, allows for the passage of knowledge and the learning of new skills and the building of confidence and efficacy that ultimately shifts people's travel behavior from motorized to non-motorized and active travel. And it's important to note that also with the other E's that all of these E's share the same purpose as engineering, and that aim is to increase walking and bicycling trips and to improve safety for pedestrian and bicyclists, thereby reducing injuries and fatalities and improving quality of life and health. So we borrowed this image, this graphic from Safe Routes to School, our partners, but have adapted it slightly for active transportation, just to reinforce the ideas that, that education, as with other interventions, needs to be context sensitive. And so based on the conditions that are available to users and the population that's being served by education, you can kind of come at it from both different ways. So where it's safe, the goal is to get people to move more by walking and bicycling and incorporating active travel into their lives. Where it's not safe, you want to really focus on safety education so that users are really safe. So if we're moving, you know, from both of these angles, we're going to get to those goals that we've set by 2020 and beyond, which is more people walking and bicycling on most days. So, you know, this is a very simple graphic. I'm sure it can be tweaked in many ways, but I think that if you're communicating to the public, this is really an effective way to think about education strategies. All right. So once again, education programs, I'm sorry, I'll back up. So once education program designers know what they're focused on and, you know, what's the context, what's the place where they're going to base their education initiatives, then they have all of these other considerations. And I'm doing this as a background just so you're familiar with all of the different things that go into the design of educational initiatives. So the focus can be on content, such as where to walk or ride your bicycle, how to cross, what are the facilities that maximize safety and reduce risk for injury and fatalities. Content can look at how to share the road. So you know, that's more nuanced. How do you ride on a road that's heavily trafficked by cars? How do you navigate crossing streets when there's a lot of school-related traffic? Why is speeding or distracted driving or distracted bicycling or distracted walking dangerous? Those are all kind of informational pieces that can be shared through educational programming. And then finally, the benefits of active transportation. I think those of us who've been working in the field for some time now really understand that our travel behaviors can have long-term impacts on public health, individual health, safety, and our environment, our air quality, and how that both affects us immediately in terms of air quality, and then long-term in terms of climate. So, so education initiatives offer that opportunity to really get into that connect up to those co-benefits that we see from active travel. Considerations have to also include audience. So who's being served by this initiative? Are they children? And if so, what age? And what is their developmental readiness for taking in the kinds of information that you want to share? So Safe Routes to School traditionally reaches kindergartners through 8th grade, based on the federal definition of Safe Routes to School. But we do know that ATP, with its flexibility now and the infusion of state funds, will probably allow for a lot more education to take place with those older students who are in 9th through 12th grade. And then there's also opportunities to do, I believe, some university-based education, and then all the adult education. So who's your audience? What is that? Who are you looking to impact? Adults, we think about adults education in terms of the public and laymen, or public that really needs information in layman's terms, really simple, clear, easily accessible, versus professionals, those that are maybe doing trainings of the public, or maybe in cases doing trainings of other professionals. And then what are the special learning needs? We have a very diverse population here in California, and even within all of our counties, we have increased diversity. And so are there language needs? Are there physical accommodations that need to be made for certain trainings? All of these things need to be feed up into how a program is designed. And then lastly, the place, the venue, when programs can occur, and resources, the funding, and what can be brought in through other sources beyond ATP are all considerations for a quality program. All right, so here's another little image that we put together just to give you an idea of some examples. These are examples that we commonly see in Safe Routes to School programs, but we know ATP is much broader. And so depending on the venue, we think that these can be used for non-Safe Routes to School students as well, these kinds of examples. So, and we like that this graphic clarifies the spectrum of examples that can demonstrate all the different options that are open to education designers, program designers, based on venues, times, and resources. So there's a trade-off for different activities in terms of the numbers of individuals who can be served, and also the quality of the learning that can take place, which ultimately we think, leads to different types of behavioral adoption. So, for example, you see on the left side of the screen, the assembly picture, that's almost an entire school being served with some pedestrian safety information. Those kids are going to hear that information once. Are they going to really retain it? There's enough studies to say that that's a great way to raise awareness, but it's not necessarily going to lead to substantive behavior change. If you have a teacher leading a lesson on, or multiple lessons on pedestrian safety, you're going to have a different impact. There's a smaller student to teacher ratio. There's an opportunity to really deepen the learning that happens and connect it to standards that are expected for student learners of different ages. So that's a different kind of learning that's going to happen from the assembly. So if you're involving parents and peers, there's a significant amount of information, research that's out there that supports that that additional layer of training can support student learning or adult learning. If you involve parents or peers in education, so that's what you see in that third image. And then skills practice is really, I think, the gold standard for education. And here on this last picture, we see a bicycling safety instructor taking out a group of middle school students so that they actually can experience what it's like to ride on the road. And I'm sure that this is actually, this last image relates back, it builds off some classroom-based knowledge that was imparted prior to on-road experience. All right. So here are some more education examples. See, these are examples that I'd like to highlight that we've received these images from some ATP awardees and some prior Safe Routes to School awardees over the years. First off, on the upper left-hand corner, we have what is referred to as a bicycle rodeo, and you'll see here that those attendees are middle school students. Again, this is hosted by a Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure program, and the particular lesson is focused on showing students how to handle their bicycles in a small space, a small shared space, which is kind of, parallels our roads. This gives students an opportunity to try out skills off the road, which is extremely safe, and it's a good precursor to that on-street riding that we just saw previously. Second square, top right, we have a community pedestrian safety class that's based at a senior center. Participants there are reviewing information about safe crossings and specific safety needs for older adults, which is a unique population. And then this education piece is actually happening in combination with discussions about pedestrian safety infrastructural improvements that are looking to take place within the area. And I believe, we've also, what you see, you've got some translators and note takers there. So we're also guessing that is part of the educational program. There's some linguistic services that are provided as part of the, the learning environment. Excuse me. All right. So then we have on the bottom left, two professional education, or sorry, on the bottom row, we have two professional education sessions. And so remember I talked about how education can be geared towards professionals as well. So on the bottom left, you see cadets who are part of a Central Valley police training program, and they've been trained to, and are actually in this photo conducting pedestrian safety for schools within a district, and they're utilizing a mock city that was designed to help students learn and reinforce the behavior of looking both ways before crossing the street, and then also ensuring that they don't cross mid-block, but instead at designated cross areas. And then finally on the bottom right, you'll see a Training the Trainers program. And those trainers are being trained to conduct bicycle rodeos and also that on-street riding as part of a comprehensive bicycle safety program. I think this is also being given that certification by the League of American Bicyclists, and they'll be also conducting smart cycling classes for families as part of this particular program. So, and in the actual picture, what you're seeing is an instructor showing the trainees the skills that are needed to make a defensive stop, quick stop, the body mechanisms and everything that will allow for a quicker stop if that's needed in a certain situation. And then that knowledge then gets imparted as part of the smart cycling class. Okay. So beyond the in-person experiences of education and that education can encompass, we also know that there are many types of resources that can guide trainings and reinforce learning, and then speak to the benefits of active travel that we talked about earlier. So this is a list, and it's not comprehensive, but it's a pretty good start, and it actually represents a lot of what we see in existing ATP programs. So I'll go through the list. Curriculums is the top of the list. Many curriculums are available already for Safe Routes to School. Not as many curriculums are available for adult learners, although we're seeing more and more being developed by partners within the state and also across the nation. For example, we're aware that there's some Spanish adult pedestrian safety curriculums that are available for new Americans who are engaged with some English learning classes. We have brochures. This is the second piece. Brochures are a great conversation starter. Those of us who work in public health education feel like we are always trying to move beyond the brochure, but we do acknowledge that they're very beneficial in terms of starting that initial conversation. So for new awardees, putting together a brochure that says, here's what our services is really, it's very helpful to have. And we encourage it. Websites, we know non-infrastructure programs benefit from having an online presence and sharing information, maps, and such. Videos, there are many great videos for safe routes to school and some other topics. For example, in Orange County, we know that there's a great 3-foot passing safety campaign that's got some clever videos that can accompany any kind of training that's going on and just be shared as a way to reinforce lessons learned. Maps, both physical maps and then on-site online maps have been helpful for reinforcing what's walkable and what's bikeable, and also identifying where it's safe to walk or suggested routes to get to key destinations. Campaigns and media, and I gave here examples, Go Human and Vision Zero. We know that some cities within the California and the ATP program have been funded to develop some pretty robust campaigns. And I just want to point out Go Human out of Skaggs region is really pretty comprehensive. They've done a remarkable job of creating some really friendly marketing materials, and that branding, for my understanding, is actually usable, can be used by anyone across the state for their own marketing purposes. Lastly, equipments are key to conducting quality education. Bikes, cones, mock cities we saw in some of these past slides. There's the equipment list is right now what it is. We are always finding from the field that sometimes more is needed to kind of really support quality programming. So we expect that the lists for eligibility might change now that we have some statewide funding. That's our hope here at the Department of Public Health. And then finally, event insurance. We know that some of the on-road events do require additional insurance for the providers who are conducting training. So that's a key resource that helps to, again, allow for quality programming. All righty, so let's see. Oops, cancel that. All right, let me shift back and take a break here. Do we have any questions?
No questions, but I do have a comment from Jim Day in District 3.
Okay.
He says, I think maybe more information sharing should be happening between the local agency, Public Health, and Public Works, where Public Works provides a list of current projects, programs underway and future, that outlines new facilities by biking and walking. New lanes paths are funded by various funds, not just ATP, and taking advantage of this information and creating new ATP NI applications to educate the local population of the new facilities and the connectivity that they provide.
I think that is a grand idea, and I think that is more of the direction that we want to see non-infrastructure programs going. So as one of the 3 ATRC coordinators, I know we're working. We're familiar with some of the work that's happening in Los Angeles, and some of the education that they're doing is very specific to some infrastructure improvements that are happening in their cities. And so it's about navigating certain high-risk intersections that have been recently transformed through infrastructure improvements. And then we've had some questions about how to navigate traffic circles, right? Which we think is, a great solution to reducing speeding, but for bicyclists and pedestrians, how do you do that comfortably if you haven't been familiar with that facility? So I think, that dialogue between Public Works and Public Health should be ongoing, and we can really learn from each other. And then the ideal is to have the ATRC really function as a clearinghouse for what's been developed and what's working across the state, so that there's an opportunity for learning statewide. That's a great question. Thank you so much, Jim. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on to encouragement?
I don't see anything. I was just gonna give them a second, but I don't see anything coming in.
Okay, I'll take a sip of water because.
We had 28 participants on. Thank you guys all for calling in.
Oh, that's great. That's a good number, 28. Okay, and that's not including those that we know who are listening in together. Perfect. All right, so that concludes my spiel on education, and so now I'm going to switch to the second E, which is encouragement. And so let me get my slides together, and we want to start by saying that encouragement is slightly different from education. It relates, but it's really its own separate E. And as previously reviewed, education is really about teaching knowledge and skills and raising awareness of the health and environmental benefits of active travel. Encouragement, in contrast, is really about generating excitement and enthusiasm for walking and rolling to school and other destinations, and involving more people and creating the support to actually make it happen. All right, so there are many emerging encouragement activities and many existing Safe Routes to School encouragement activities that we're going to talk about briefly today. And so so what we've done for the next couple slides is organize these slides according to the audience and the context in which these encouragement activities can take place. So our first one is school-based encouragement activities. So I know we have Safe Routes to School programs in every single district in California. So for the Safe Routes to School programs, a lot of them were built upon that 5 E's model, and and many of those programs, as far as non-infrastructure strategies, the signature encouragement event was International Walk to School Day, which we know is at the start of October every year. There are actually a number of materials that are already available for free and customizable downloading from the National Center for Safe Routes to School to support International Walk to School Day activities. What's nice is that we also have schools that are benefiting from ATP and Safe Routes to School investments. We really encourage them to go to that website and actually also show that they're part of a federal Safe Routes to School initiative, and there's some tracking that happens at the federal level for Safe Routes to School there. So walking school bus and bicycle trains are also a signature encouragement activity of Safe Routes to School programs. And just recently, CDPH has released, worked in partnership with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership to develop a new guide on walking school bus specifics. That's a lot of S's, sorry. So that's about, training those chaperones to lead walking school buses. For those of you who aren't familiar with walking school buses, students are encouraged to walk to school in chaperoned groups that take pre-designated routes with timed spots at different locations to pick up students en route to a school. And so I actually have a visual of that on the next slide. But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit about frequent walker rider competitions. And that actually relates to two bullets below, which is class competitions. So a number of encouragement activities that we're seeing throughout the state use this competitive model where schools or classes can compete to have the number of the highest number of individuals who walk or bicycle to school within a given time frame. There's some really creative awards out there, and we know that they can be given the Golden Helmet Award, the Golden Sneaker Award, the Golden Wheel, the Green Sneaker. There's lots of different variations on it depending on what the focus of the program needs to be. But it's also what's great to remember that's all really low cost to the program, so it doesn't have to be something too costly. Can reserve funds for other things. Remote drop-off zones are often used in combination with the events above, and then encouraging active travel by actually having students do calculations of gas save and reduced carbon footprints is another tool that we've seen used in a number of programs to successful ends. So here are some visuals to go with the list that we talked about previously. So I'll first talk about scan tags. Technology here is used to support frequent walker bicyclist challenges to school. Students give a barcode, are given a barcode, they attach it to their backpacks, and then upon arrival, those barcodes are scanned. And that data is registered as a walk bike trip. And then this data also gets stored and accrued over the challenge period. And then awards can be given to those students who've taken the most trips or walked or bicycled the farthest, because a lot of these programs actually now calculate not just trips, but mileage. And then they also, they translate it into gas savings and greenhouse gas reductions. So Active for Me is one such program, and that's what you're seeing. I think a lot of technology via phone is being applied now so that you actually don't have to buy scanners. Because I think most phones now have readers on them. So there's lots of innovation that can happen based on upgrades to technology that we're seeing. Our second picture is walking school buses. This is a traditional train. Here you see the leader at the front. And walking, what I want to point out is walking school buses address a lot of concerns that parents might have initially about having their children walk or bicycle to school, because they do allow for that added supervision, and then also that safety in numbers effect. And then finally, bike trains are the equivalent to walking school buses in the bike world, and I have a note here to say that bicycle trains, really should be based upon developmental readiness and cohesion within a group, because that's really where you can keep people together. So, all right. So those are the school-based encouragement activities that we're going to talk about today. I'm sure there's more, and I would actually encourage any of the districts that have more to add to the conversation to take those into the chat box. We'd be really interested in hearing what else you're seeing from the field or ideas that you're hearing, even if they're not funded. Type those into the chat box. But at this point, I'll move forward to community-based encouragement activities. So here we have a list, and at the top is Open Streets. Open Streets events are are a little more recent. We're so happy and pleased to see that they're funded through they can be funded through the ATP program. Open Streets events actually closes streets down to motorized traffic, allowing for new ways for individuals to perceive an area as they travel by foot or by bicycle. And Open Streets also present an opportunity for interested organizations to host pop-ups or different installations that will then allow for more discussion and dialogue about proposed infrastructure improvements. So we see that a lot happening, not just in the big cities, but now increasingly in some of the smaller cities as well. Group bike rides are very popular in terms of, especially when they're in combination with May is Bike Month. These group rides can also be done as part of an smart cycling educational series. Walking clubs, we see public health departments really hosting a number of walking clubs to key destinations from other destinations such as senior centers, shopping centers and such, again, reinforcing the idea that distances are walkable. Maps, again, both serve educational and encouragement purposes. For encouragement purposes, they really do show that the distances are walkable and also can be used as part of those physical activity minutes that are so essential to health. And walking and bicycling ambassadors, that's kind of an exciting new program, type of programming that we're seeing where community-based volunteers are being used to reach out to new users thereby expanding the numbers of those who are actually trying out a way of traveling. With these ambassador programs, we're seeing both extensive education and training for the ambassadors, as well as reinforcements and rewards for taking that leadership role. Family biking events are really an extension of the group rides that we talked about earlier, but they're more specific clearly to accommodating both the needs of adult and child combination pedestrians or bicyclists. And then lastly, we wanted to add here bike share systems, which we know there's a big push happening for bike share in a lot of cities. This gives immediate access to bicycles for those users who are willing to pay a fee to use it for select periods of time. ATP actually does fund bike share systems, and we are tracking kind of what's happening in these areas so that we can have more to share as we progress into future cycles of ATP. All right, so here are some visuals to go with that boring list that I just talked through. So walk bike maps on the left, you'll see you have logged in from another device. Okay, is that okay? Yeah. All right, sorry about that. So here we have walk bike maps, and I apologize that the images aren't much bigger, but I do want to point out that they can really look different, and I think it's really important to consider aesthetic and design. The walk map on the left is unique. It's got some nice icons that point out where are trees and parks, where's the connect up with transit, and then it highlights different distances, and then it provides some historical background on some key locations. So it's a nice way to show what you can see all on your trip. And then the bike maps are helpful in kind of design in showing where are routes, and what are the ways to get from one place to another to maintain connectivity on a facility that's designated for bicyclists from here to there. So that's great as a planning tool and great as an encouragement tool. Open Streets. This is a picture of Sacramento's, the city of Sacramento's first Open Street event, which is I think a huge success. We know that here in Sacramento, that 2.4 miles were closed off to car traffic for a few hours one morning not so long ago. The effort was led by the city, but with lots of different support from community and business partners. And part of that event included some pop-up demonstrations from walk and bicycle advocates within the area who were showing some of the improvements that were anticipated for that corridor. So the whole overall day stressed health and community, and was a great combination of stakeholders, including law enforcement, that encourage people to be out in their communities. I know we know that there are many open streets initiatives, cyclovia initiatives that are happening, and in part supported by ATP. And then the last picture is a walking club, and they apparently are using a facility that's off road here, but when we talk about this, we hope that this is actually then connected back up to some other sidewalks once they're back in a more urbanized environment. Okay, so I've got a little bit more before I switch it over to Mary. Our last encouragement list of strategies is all focused on employer-based strategies. And so we've got 5 different things that we want to briefly mention. Commuter challenges. Employers have the opportunity to connect active travel to initiatives that including Spare the Air. They can also set up challenges that are similar to those that are done for students as part of Walk or Bike to School Month. These can be week or month-long challenges, and they can build off that whole idea of leaving the car at home. Walk and bike to work days can be hosted by work sites, And they can include things like energizer stations or welcome receptions. And then in advance of the actual day, it can include an educational component. Walking meetings is really more about physical activity versus travel. But we're just going to throw it in here as something that employers can do to get people walking and moving. And then bicycling and commuting tips are really important. I know our own organization, Department of Public Health, provides training classes for those that are interested in smart cycling. And then that's actually done now in combination with our worksite bike share program. And there is actually new legislation, I think, that has recently passed where the state agencies can expand their bike share programs. So more to come on that, definitely. Okay, and these are just some visuals to for your own understanding and awareness of what these things look like. So this is on the left, we've got some happy riders who are going to bike to work day. This is part of May is Bike Month. It's work sites that do this are great because they show that you don't have to dress in spandex to bicycle to bicycle and get the benefits of bicycling. And then lastly, this is a bike share system photo, and I apologize because it's not our work site bike share system, which is a little more modest, but this is in fact a city-based one, but it's a great visual nonetheless. All right, so let me go back one slide and ask if are there any questions?
I haven't had any come in.
All righty.
I think you're just giving so much information they don't have to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank folks for letting me present today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mary Strode. Thank you again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Strode, and I'm happy to be here and participate in this training. Hopefully, all of you are engaged and learning some new things and finding that the in-service is helpful so far. It's also been a while since we've all been sitting, so I wanted to take a minute to encourage everyone to get a little bit of a stretch break. So wherever you're sitting, you're welcome to stand up and stretch your arms up to the ceiling and do some gentle neck rolls or neck rotations, whatever might feel good to you, just to kind of get some of the kinks out. And then I'm going to get started in 15, 20 seconds or so. Okay, now that we're all stretched out, we're going to proceed with this segment on enforcement strategies. If there's anything that you take away from this segment, hopefully it will be this. It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a community to do effective enforcement. The main goal for enforcement is to keep conditions safe for pedestrians and bicyclists in order to reduce collisions and injuries. Enforcement has three main roles. 1, to increase awareness. 2, to reduce traffic safety problems. And 3, to improve the behavior of all roadway users, so pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and others. While much of enforcement is directed towards changing the behavior of drivers, it's also important to improve the behaviors of pedestrians and bicyclists. The key outcome of enforcement is not to write tickets or to punish offenders. It's very important to note that everyone in the community should play a positive role in enforcement, including students, parents, teachers, school administrators, crossing guards, police, and the community. Enforcement is a complementary strategy in terms of active transportation and safety. The use of enforcement without the use of the other E's, so education, encouragement, and engineering, which we haven't talked too much about in this training, but it is in this instance an important E. So the use of enforcement without these other E's in play will have a limited and temporary impact. This slide simply reinforces the point that a variety of people in the community should be involved in enforcement in order for enforcement to be effective. School and community efforts. So schools and communities are partners with traditional law enforcement. There are different ways that communities and schools can contribute to enforcement efforts. In this particular presentation, we're going to briefly touch on student safety patrols and crossing guards. Student safety patrols are an excellent example of a school-based enforcement effort. Older students can aid in enforcement of drop-off and pickup procedures and safe pedestrian behavior on campus. Having a student safety patrol at a school provides opportunities for older students to be directly involved in promoting safety around their school and requires a committed teacher or parent volunteer to coordinate the patrol and the training of the folks that are doing the patrol work. It's important to note that some communities may not allow or may limit how students participate in safety patrol activities due to liability concerns. I find it interesting to note that AAA provides support for school safety patrol groups by supplying training materials, recognition programs for service, and patrol equipment. School crossing guard programs are considered to be one method of enforcement. Crossing guards are a very important part of the community and serve a vital role in protecting the lives of children who walk or roll to school. The basic function of crossing guards is to help children safely cross the street at key locations and remind drivers of the presence of pedestrians. One of the many wonderful resources available to the field via the ATRC website is the 2015 California School Crossing Guard Training Guidelines. This resource speaks to the fact that training is an essential step to help ensure that crossing guards are performing their duties properly. The guidelines reflect the 2014 edition of the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. The guidelines, though not mandated, provide consistent operating standards to assist local school crossing guard programs in training both existing as well as new crossing guards. We encourage local programs to utilize these guidelines to inform their program practices and replace or supplement existing training procedures to promote safety. As mentioned earlier, the whole community should be involved in keeping children safe as they travel to and from school. Law enforcement plays a very clear and vital role in this process. Again, the key outcome of enforcement is to change behavior of all road users, not to write tickets or punish offenders. Enforcement efforts are most effective when combined with the other E's. For example, traffic calming techniques such as speed bumps, lane narrowing, safe crossing facilities, and the use of sidewalks are examples of how engineering efforts can improve safety and tie in with enforcement. Earlier in this presentation, Victoria shared examples of education and encouragement strategies, which are also part of the picture. Law enforcement uses a variety of tools and methods such as speed trailers, hotlines, pedestrian decoys, photo enforcement, and progressive ticketing. Whatever enforcement methods are used are going to vary greatly across communities. As communities are all different, there's different resources available for enforcement, and there are multiple enforcement priorities. And so it's a real juggling act. Every community will be different. This slide details the primary enforcement concerns in safe routes to school or non-infrastructure programs. All of these behaviors are targets of enforcement activities. However, the importance of enforcing speed limits and implementing measures to reduce vehicle speed cannot be overstated. I'm about to show you a slide with a graphic on it that you might have seen before. Basically, this graphic illustrates that the faster a vehicle travels, the greater the likelihood of injury or death to a pedestrian. This graphic, based on data from the UK, shows that if a vehicle traveling 20 miles per hour hits a pedestrian, there's a 5% chance that the pedestrian will be killed by the impact. In contrast, if the vehicle is traveling twice as fast and hits a pedestrian, there is an 85% chance of death. At low speeds, risks are relatively low. However, as speeds increase, small changes in speed yield relatively large increases in risk. The risk of severity of injury also increases the faster the vehicle is traveling, which is of course understandable. The type of vehicle and the age of the pedestrian also make a difference in collision outcomes. With miles per hour being a constant, the larger the vehicle, the greater the risk of injury or death, and young children and the elderly are at highest risk. This bar graph basically relays the same information as the previous one, just in a different way. So the red bars depict chance of death based on 3 levels of vehicle speed. We've all seen these in our communities. These are portable speed trailers. And what they do is they visually display drivers' real-time speeds compared to the speed limit. These devices can be very effective in reducing speeds and increasing awareness of local speed limits, which is an important role of enforcement. Portable speed trailers are most effective when the trailer flashes "slow down" or flashes a bright white light that mimics a photo speed camera, or a blue and red light that mimics a police car when drivers are moving too fast by the trailer. Some speed trailers have the capability to collect traffic count data and speed data throughout the day, which can be used to identify the most dangerous traffic times when more enforcement may be needed. Generally speaking, speed trailers are best used in residential areas and can be used in conjunction with neighborhood speed watch programs. We thought it would be a good idea to briefly run through unsafe pedestrian, bicyclist, and driver behaviors in this section of the presentation. So the key unsafe pedestrian behaviors are not looking left, right, and left before crossing the street, crossing a street at an undesirable or unsafe location, darting out into the street between parked cars, and not following the directions of the crossing guard or traffic signals. Unsafe bicyclist behaviors are riding into traffic without looking left, right, and left, riding against traffic rather than with the flow of traffic, turning left without looking or without signaling, not obeying traffic signs or signals, riding out from the driveway, not wearing bike helmets, and not being visible at night. Now, in Sacramento, I see all of these on a daily basis. And it really strikes me how important these behaviors are to promote safety. Law enforcement can help reduce bicycle and pedestrian mishaps by monitoring and enforcing unsafe on-campus driver behavior on school streets and in parking lots. Students that are walking and biking are vulnerable to injury from vehicles in drop-off and pickup zones, as well as bus zones. It's very common for drivers to violate the rules by either parking illegally, stopping in the bus zone, dropping off students in the street or on the driver's side of the car instead of on the safer side of the car, and dropping off students so that they must walk in between parked cars or behind or in front of buses. We're gonna switch and go into the evaluation area, but I wanted to see if anybody has any burning questions on the enforcement segment.
I have had nothing come through.
Okay. We're gonna then segue over to the evaluation, and I just have one slide, but a few things to say about the slide. So evaluation, non-infrastructure strategies, regardless of what they are and what shape they take, should include program evaluation in order to determine at minimum who was reached by the education and the encouragement activities, what activities were implemented, and what the impact of the activities were on changing attitudes about walking and bicycling or active transportation, and bicycle and pedestrian behavior or mode shift. Lots of evaluation tools are available from the National Center for Safe Routes to School and can be customized for use by local projects. We have learned that a lot of local projects prefer to design their own evaluation tools, which is fine. As feasible, outcome measures can be expanded to include changes in speed distributions, diversion of traffic to adjoining areas, delays to motorists, safety effects in affected areas, general public pedestrian and motorist knowledge of and reactions to the project, non-traffic benefits such as improved quality of life, and cost-benefit calculations. Just like for enforcement, the amount of resources available for evaluation and the type and scope of evaluation activities are going to vary from community to community and project to project. But whatever amount of time and resources are put into evaluation are generally well worth it, as long as the evaluation plan is both feasible and sound, and the results then will be instrumental in informing current and future efforts. Plans. So as you all know, funding from the ATP may be used to fund the development of community-wide active transportation plans, which include bike, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or comprehensive active transportation plans. ATP planning projects are reserved for disadvantaged communities only. The benefits of developing a non-infrastructure or comprehensive plan are numerous. Plans provide a basic framework for establishing, launching, and sustaining a non-infrastructure program. A planning framework is built through diverse community member and cross-sector participation in a process that allows plenty of time to consider community data, identify problems, identify bicycle pedestrian facilities that may need to be built or that may need to be improved, survey the enforcement landscape, identify what's worked or what's not worked before, identify signage needs, as well as examine various approaches and solutions. Each active transportation plan is unique and reflective of the community and the community's needs and goals. So the plan could be a standalone plan, or it could be a component of a community's larger and more comprehensive plan, either one. A well thought out and detailed plan demonstrates broad community participation, city or county leader buy-in, and includes an evaluation strategy which will increase the success of implementation activities and provide a tangible and specific roadmap to assess project outcomes. So as Victoria mentioned earlier in the in-service, this is the opportunity for some robust discussion or questions or comments from the field about anything that has been discussed and addressed today in our in-service. So please use the chat function. Take your time, and we're here to answer your questions. Any questions that we can't answer today, we will follow up with you after the webinar.
Hell yeah.
Earlier?
They did earlier.
Okay.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me now? Type something in the chat box
Yes,
if you
yes.
can. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Hopefully that was just a temporary glitch.
I did answer the Fitbit question on here, though.
Okay.
Oh, thanks,
But if
Mary.
you want to repeat what you were saying.
Sure. Sorry. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself or how much was heard, but I was just saying that one of the things that we do want to stress is that there are programs that could be complementary to ATP initiatives that might be out of, say, like local public health departments that might have opportunities to supplement kind of what ATP efforts and actually get at equipment like Fitbits and things like that might enhance your programmatic efforts. But at this point, it's our understanding that those commercial products aren't part of what's allowable in the latest guidance, at least. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Any more questions, Mary, coming in? No. Yeah. And we apologize about the audio, and because we did anticipate opportunities to have a dialogue via phone, but for whatever reasons, that feedback is really preventing us from having that open conversation. So, but go ahead and if you continue to have questions, ask through the chat box, and Mary's going to wrap us up here and give some contact information as part of our wrap up.
So as we've shared in today's in-service, many complementary strategies are involved in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of a non-infrastructure program at the local and regional level. Programs don't ever look exactly the same, as they are a reflection of the community, and all communities are different. However, there are certain common elements to successful non-infrastructure programs, and of course many required elements per the CTC guidelines, and an assortment of best practices, tools, and resources that can boost success. The ATRC team housed in the Department of Public Health takes great pleasure in providing high quality, tailored technical assistance and training on the education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and planning components of local and regional non-infrastructure projects to help folks optimize their project success. Our team wants to work with Caltrans, other ATRC providers, and ATP awardees to capture and to learn what's happening in the field so that we can adjust our technical assistance and training efforts accordingly. Please feel free to contact our team if you're hearing or seeing things in the field that you think we should either know about or that you think our expertise can help address. We know that the future will entail assessing the needs for new materials and educational resources, so we look forward to developing new resources and making them available through the ATRC website. We really want your feedback on this in-service, so please look out for a Survey Gizmo email tomorrow to solicit your feedback on today's webinar. I promise you the survey is short and it should only take a couple minutes. And again, once you get that email, if there are other folks that have attended this training in your unit or in your agency, please forward the link to them so that we get as much feedback as possible from those that participated today. Here's our contact information and how we are divvying up the various Caltrans districts in the provision of non-infrastructure related technical assistance to the field. So again, feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again for your participation. Mary, would you like to share any last words?
I just want to thank everyone for calling in and staying on the line. There was a lot of information here. Thank you, Public Health. And again, if you can't get any questions, if you have questions for Public Health, or if you get questions from some agencies or interested parties that you cannot answer, please forward them to the regional coordinator at Public Health, and they can provide some expertise. And lastly, I want to reiterate what she said. Please complete the evaluation and that they send to you, and please send to anyone else that's in the room, and you guys are just using one line to attend. And also, I think everyone got an email from April Nitsos, but if you did not, on July 3rd, there will be a new ATRC manager at Caltrans. Her name is Emily Abrahams, and she is also the NI manager. So please be ready for that transition beginning on July 3rd. And thank you again, and I have nothing else.
All right, thank you, and I'm going to stop the audio in just a bit.
Laura Rose said thank you for the great information.
Great.